I hate that I never got to eat at his restaurant before it closed.
Yeah, the Greenville. Cleveland.
You been?
No. What did we? We were on the tour.
Okay, so we are live. So CJ, you just let me know.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready to click over and.
Okay, I'm good whenever you are. Gentlemen, you good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ready to
Yeah,
go?
I'm gonna put the No, I just said I was.
You need to switch your routing.
Huh?
Back is on MC1 programming.
Is it back? We just turned it to OTT
I
out.
hit OTT.
It's on OTT out.
Mhm.
My router's wrong.
I'm gonna put the live stream up over here on y'all side. So whenever if I pop up a question or whatever,
Oh yeah, then we'll
you'll
see
be
it.
able to see it.
Okay.
Okay, so all right, in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Wlbt Plus. This is a special edition of the Digital News Desk. It's election night, as many of you know, and although polls have closed roughly 55 minutes ago here, certainly we're starting to see more results come in the presidential election. I'm joined with two analysts much smarter than myself, and thank goodness for that. Dr. DeAndre Ori from JSU, and of course, Dr. Glenn Antizzo from Mississippi College. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
It's very important to kind of be able to provide perspective as we see these numbers come in. Obviously, a lot of talking heads on television tonight giving their view on what could happen, what may not happen. Have there been any surprises thus far, Dr. Ori? I want to start with you and just some of the results that have started trickling in. Right now, Donald Trump has a sizable electoral vote lead. That probably wasn't that surprising at this point. Is there anything that you're seeing that seems out of the norm thus far?
No, so I call it the Republican L, the bold Republican L that starts up in North Dakota, goes down to Texas, and then goes over to Florida. We're starting to get returns in those areas. We're getting them scattered out, but the expectation that I had going in, and it's not inconsistent with what we're seeing now. I did see in Pennsylvania and Michigan that Harris was up, but that was very, very early on. I haven't seen the Georgia numbers, but I haven't seen anything that's surprising thus far.
We had talked about this a little bit, Dr. Antizzo, last week, and of course, many national pundits are saying, as goes Pennsylvania, so goes the race. Is that sort of the sentiment here, gentlemen, as we're getting closer, as these votes are being counted?
Yeah, I would say that's the part of the blue wall that is the most likely to fall. James Carville once famously described Pennsylvania as Philadelphia in the east, Pittsburgh in the west, and Alabama in the middle, except for the area around State College. The northern tier of the state and the central part of the state are largely heavily Republican. It's rural, mountainous areas, but very heavily Republican. And if Trump can chip away, particularly in the Pittsburgh area, I would think, or the suburbs around Philadelphia, he's got a chance. And all the polls coming out of there have been within the margin of error. So it's anybody's guess what's going to happen.
Sure. And then in all those blue wall states, those metropolitan areas, urban areas like Philadelphia, where there's a high concentration of blacks who overwhelmingly vote Democrat, that's where you're going to see an increase in vote for Harris. So that's going to be interesting to see, what the turnout looks like in those areas.
I want to pull up the numbers that we have right now, and of course, these are numbers that have come from the Associated Press, so that people at home can get an idea. People watching us on our website, on Facebook, of course, right now. And again, this is with still not. We're not seeing a percentage on how much in terms of percentage of precincts at this point, or percentage of the country this is reflected in. But at least right at this point, 53% of the vote going to Donald Trump, about almost 3.5 million people difference in terms of the popular vote there. And when you look at the electoral vote, which we don't have on the screen right now, but I can show you in a few, Donald Trump has 105 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 30. And so that is something I want to say, when we're looking at these numbers coming in, we have to also take into account that early voting sometimes leans a particular direction, don't we? We have to take that into consideration when people are looking at these, because then they might say, "Oh, look at this. This is." I remember some of the theories that we saw in 2020. One of those was, Trump was way ahead, and then suddenly this happened. Suddenly somebody came. Suddenly Biden came back from behind, and we don't know what happened. But that's the nature of these
Yeah.
situations when you have votes counted in the way they're counted, and how various states have differences in when they're counted, right?
Yeah, so if you look at a place like Georgia,
Yeah.
and you look at the Atlanta area, so if you count ballots outside of Atlanta, and then you get those Atlanta numbers, that number in terms of Democrats is going to increase tremendously. And of course, we haven't gotten California, so when you start looking at just the popular vote, that'll change dramatically.
Dr. Antizo, I want to ask you about whether or not you think we're going to see any surprises as it relates to some of the other races. We have 2 congressional races right now. We have, of course, Benny Thompson, the incumbents Benny Thompson and Roger Wicker.
Right.
And it looks like at this point the race has not been called for Congressman Thompson, but I believe Roger Wicker was projected
Correct. Yes.
in his race to win. And so I just wonder, as we look at this, what that means in the grand scheme of things, because in terms of the balance of power,
Right.
it's not really going to make heads or tails what happens in Mississippi.
Well, just first getting to the numbers for Congressman Thompson, I think that there's a little bit of shyness in making that call yet, because last time around in 2022, he had a little closer shave than he's used to in the vote. And so I think that might give people some pause, although I'm reasonably sure he's going to win. But you're right. For both Senator Wicker and Congressman Thompson, a change in the balance of power in Congress is going to benefit both of them and may have some nice dividends for Mississippi, assuming that the Democrats are able to get control of the House. And I saw a projection that they would win, but the model showed that it was going to be really close. At the end, the model I saw was projecting 218 for the Democrats, 217. So it's going to be a razor thin. It's going to make what the Republicans had over the last 2 years look like a big fat majority.
Sure.
But that would allow Congressman Thompson to resume his role as chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. And then for Senator Wicker, obviously he's going to win big, I think, tonight. And Senator Wicker is the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee in the Senate, and assuming the Republicans get control of the Senate, that would put him in a very powerful position, not just to have influence over national policy towards defense, but also to redirect the money to Mississippi. We have several military bases here. We have a extraordinary number of Mississippians who participate in national defense. It could mean some money flowing this way.
We don't have live numbers of the Senate, but I want to show you the balance of power coming into Election Day for the U.S. Senate. And then this is something that, again, the picture coming into tonight, or today, I should say, was that Democrats held a slim lead over Republicans. Those 4 that you see there, those 4 seats are independents who have aligned themselves with Democrats there in Washington. As it stands right now, Republicans, in terms of the races that have been compiled, and this is from NBC News, it's 42-33 with the Republicans having a 9-seat lead in the Senate. In the House, a little bit different. We don't have nearly as many races that have obviously been called at this point. Coming into today, well, that's the Senate.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. For the House, Republicans held the House, of course, by 8. And there were 3 dots you could see there on the left side of that line, which were vacancies, of course. So right now, Republicans lead in the House 79-38. Of course, there's still a lot more, several races that have to be called before we can see anything there. That's very interesting what you said. Do you see any other surprises in terms of, you mentioned the House, do you see the Senate Democrats maintaining their control in the Senate?
No, I think it's going to be very difficult. They have a lot more territory to defend in this election cycle, and you've got very competitive races. Most notably, in West Virginia, you've got sort of a maverick Democrat in Senator Joe Manchin, and he has decided not to run. Governor Justice is running for that seat, and it looks like he's going to pick up that seat. That should be a pretty easy win. In Montana, a few weeks ago, I would have said Tester was probably going to lose that race. It might be a little more competitive because of a controversy about military service and a wound that the Republican candidate claims that he got while in service. And then you've got competitive races in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan.
Mhm.
So, but I think right now, I think that the momentum seems to be favoring the Republicans. I don't know how big the majority will be, but I think they will get in the majority.
I want to switch gears a little bit to the state Supreme Court race, because again, when it comes to the race for president, some of these races where you've had strong incumbents on the congressional side, no real surprises here when it comes to these races. But when it comes to two races in particular, there are two seats up for grabs in the Mississippi Supreme Court, the Central District, of course, and the Southern. Those terms, of course, are for 8 years, twice that of your typical statewide elected official in Mississippi. Supreme Court justices, of course, handle decisions at the highest level. And something else to point out here is that for the last 30 years, since 1994, justices and the races there are supposed to be nonpartisan. So I want to bring up the numbers to see where we are thus far on, if I can actually, okay. So this is Supreme Court District 1. And of course, incumbent Jim Kitchens right now trailing. It's looking, obviously you have a kind of a crowded ticket here, but Jennifer Branning, the newcomer who's branded herself a constitutional conservative, leading thus far with 3% of the votes in, with 54%. Dr. Ori, can you talk to us about, what you're seeing here? What is that a surprise? Jim Kitchens has been in this role for some time. He's no stranger to Mississippi politics. Or is that expected tonight?
Well, we're really, really early
Sure.
with respect to those numbers. One thing that you have to take a look at is that this is a Democratic-leaning district. It's in the Central District, and you have the Department of Transportation, the Transportation Commissioner, Public Service Commissioner. Both Democrats have actually won those seats in that particular district. Now, there's one candidate who was actually run before, who was run as a Democrat, or she leans ideologically as if she were running as a Democrat with respect to the court's position. And that could actually fracture the vote with respect to Kitchen, because Kitchen is moderate with House Bill 1020. He thought that was not a good idea, and his opinion, dissenting opinion, yielded that he had a problem with respect to House Bill 1020 infringing on the rights. But it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the vote is fractured amongst those two candidates.
It's interesting because when we look at the approaches both of them have taken, and again, we talked before this broadcast about how it may not have been very clear just whether or not advertisements that have been out there resonated with voters here. But there couldn't be a more stark contrast when you look at the two individuals in terms of how they approached it. I saw Kitchen's advertising spot had him in a kitchen with his wife, and she was trying to get him out of the kitchen. Fairly benign spot. Jennifer Branning's, of course, had imagery and other things that suggested more of a partisan lean. And she's, again, she's not kept secret that she's a constitutional conservative.
And she's been endorsed by the Republican Party.
Right.
So she's coming off as a conservative. I mean, it's a nonpartisan race, of course, but the conservatism here is a proxy for a Republican. The moderate, with this particular district being 51% African American, which African Americans overwhelmingly support the Democratic Party. Moderate is probably an ideology that you would expect in this particular district. When I was speaking about the candidate running earlier, I was just saying that as a candidate who is not as competitive, they could actually siphon off some of the votes that would be needed for someone like Kitchens to win that particular race. And it's going to be interesting to see, what the outcome of that, and, how much votes actually go to Kitchens. Go to the third candidate rather than Kitchens.
That's true. I want to look at these numbers very quickly too, Kara. So right now we're at just about 5% of the vote in, and look at how it's already swinging. Again, this illustrates, if nothing else, that these are far too early, as Dr. Ori said, to really make any kind of judgment at this point. Branding's lead diminishing to 45%. Kitchens has gone up to some degree. But to your point, Ciola James, with 14% of the total thus far, siphoning some of that more than likely from Kitchens. The argument can be made that certainly with her in the race, it fractures the vote. And in these situations, I'm going to ask a question. I don't know the answer to it. That's not something we're supposed to do here. But I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, because I know you know the answers, and I don't mind looking like I'm not knowledgeable here. You don't have runoffs in these kinds of races, do you? Or do you when it comes to state Supreme Court races?
Wait, say that again.
Runoffs. When you have four, if somebody gets under 50% of the vote, we're gonna have runoffs in these races as well? I would the possibility of that. Again, I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot. It occurred to me.
I'll defer to Dr. Ori on that one. I honestly do not know myself.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, see, I'm not sure either.
In a nonpartisan race, because
right.
the runoffs typically are in these primaries.
Right.
So.
Yeah, we'll check on that and try to let. My apologies for asking something.
No. Look.
But again, when you look at this and you see that she, nobody right now commanding 50% of the vote, certainly, and those numbers coming in. I mean, we might wait long hours before we see. A resolution of this, depending on what were you going to say?
But if you look at those numbers, exactly the point I was making is that, he's at 5,900, and if the pattern, holds, which we have a long way to go, he gets those 3,000 votes. He's actually competitive with Branding.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I don't see James, being competitive moving forward, but it just depends on how much she gets in terms of ciphering those votes off.
That's right. We've already had some more votes counted. I want to go to the Electoral College map for just a second.
Okay.
And it will take a tiny bit to load. Our system is pulling information from the Associated Press as these results are called.
Oh, wow.
And so right now, according to the numbers that we have from the Associated Press, the electoral vote lead for former President Donald Trump has narrowed. He has 137. Kamala Harris has 99. And you can see now, as far as states that have already been called, a sizable number of states. As you mentioned, Dr. Ori, for Harris, we have not really any surprise there for some of these. In terms of leans, though, you're seeing some leans for Harris in sort of the breadbasket there. Coming across. What do you think is, obviously a good portion of the western part of the country too has yet to, as polls haven't closed yet, start reporting in. No real surprises even this far in?
No, if we go back, we just saw Texas pop up.
Yeah.
If you go back to my point earlier with respect to that Republican L, that's what you see right away, with the exception of Georgia.
Right.
And it used to be, so goes the South, so goes the election. Of course, that's changed now with these various swing states and competitive battleground states. But we're getting numbers in that are typically, Republican numbers in terms of the large size of red that we're seeing.
There are a couple of surprises on here, though. You do see a couple of cracks in the blue wall. You've got Wisconsin and Minnesota, Tim Walz's own state, leaning that way. Now it's early in the game, so we'll see what happens. Just like, you also on the map, you had Missouri and Kansas going for Harris. That would also be a surprise if that were to happen.
Yeah.
Right. 15% of the vote in Missouri at this point, and in Kansas, 38.6%.
Right.
But if some of those, of course, more populous areas, as we typically
in
see.
college towns.
In college towns. And we tend to see that play out, as we look at Mississippi. When you see some of those more rural areas going for former President Trump, some of the more populated areas, not always going for the Democratic nominee, but certainly too in counties that are majority Black, typically tend to go more Democratic. And we got just 10% of the votes in at this point. But I know that you had, and you don't have them in front of you, but I know that you probably could probably recall them from memory, Dr. Ori, when you're looking at those maps from the previous elections and
Oh,
everything. Are we seeing any surprises in the state thus far?
Well, we don't have a whole lot, to glean from, but
Right.
I can tell you right away before you fill in that map that Mississippi Delta will be blue.
Yep.
The coast will be red. Northeast will be red.
Mm-hmm.
And so possibly October High and then Lafayette will be blue.
Right.
But this map will look like 2016 and
Yeah.
2020 before the night's over with.
I'm curious to see Madison only because when Madison County in 2020, it was a narrow victory for former President Trump. About 55% of the population voted for him, about 43%, 44% for Biden. And that was probably the closest in the 3-county area. It was a 4-1 difference with Biden leading the way in Hinds County, of course, and then in Rankin County, it was the opposite for former President Trump. So it'll be interesting to kind of see where that goes. I mean, obviously the state's already been called for President Trump, so we're just looking at differences at this point.
No, some nuances. Madison is a county that we need to keep an eye on because it, in my opinion, is a true suburb. When you start looking at Rankin County is a suburb, but it still has some rural, geographical components to it.
Right.
Madison as well, because you got the Canton area, so on and so forth. But, in terms of suburbanites and it having a high income level in that particular county, you may see a lot more moderate voters there. And, even when Mike Espy ran, we saw that Madison, didn't go blue, but because he was, I guess, quote unquote, not a native son, actually, but because he was, living in that Madison area, he got a boost in terms of those numbers. So I'd be interested to see how Madison's going to do in the future.
Yeah. I was gonna look at some Facebook comments at this point, and we appreciate everybody watching from Facebook. Many of them are somewhat partisan, with folks endorsing both candidates, presidential candidates. Oh, go ahead. How long does it normally take to get a complete tally? Midnight, sometimes longer, depending on how these. Can you kind of, either one of you want to take that one just to kind of give an idea? Because I think sometimes whenever we don't get instant results, or we think that we've always gotten instant results in the past, that people tend to look into that and think that there's something nefarious or something wrong with that. But the reality is that it's just a lot of work.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're going to have a lot of this time, early votes, and you're going to have a lot of absentee ballots to take care of. My understanding is, for example, in North Carolina, 60% of the state had already voted before today. And in Georgia, I think it was about 40%. And a lot of these folks are doing it on voting machines at a location, but others are using drop boxes to drop off ballots. And you're going to have to mechanically, hand feed these into a scanner if they're doing it that way. And as a result, it's going to take a long time. It's not like, when the machines that we have here where, you just put the ballot in on your own and it scans, and you have those ballots right there. In this case, you got to have the ballots come in. You've got to, in some states that you have to wait before you can even open the ballots. And so it takes a while to do this. So as Dr. Ori pointed out, very labor intensive, and it's going to take a long time. I would not be the least bit surprised if you do not know in some states until tomorrow at some point. And when I say tomorrow, I mean, by the time you're having breakfast.
Right.
Yeah, in a case like this, when the contest is so close, it's going to take a while for you to, get some results. So I think it's going to take, I would agree, tomorrow at least.
Yeah.
I guess I don't like saying cliches or using cliches on the air, but just pack your patience right now and just relax. And, obviously it's like we're all waiting. It's like we're all waiting for test results to come back. We're all waiting with bated breath. But again,
but this is not our first rodeo at it either.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And we've had protracted instances before. I think back to hanging chads.
Yep. 2000.
As long as we're not waiting until mid-December to get a result, I think
Sure.
we'll be good.
Gentlemen, just any closing thoughts? I think, obviously we're going to continue this discussion on WLBT and Fox 40. Will be analyst Dr. Ori and Dr. Antizzo will be on with me, and they'll be imparting knowledge on Fox 40 at 9 o'clock and on WLBT News at 10. But just to kind of wrap up here, any final thoughts you want to leave voters with, people who are watching tonight?
So there's a lot of talk about the urban settings in terms of the black vote,
Mhm.
and because blacks overwhelmingly vote Democrat. But I think the deciding vote here is going to be white women. And, white women possibly in suburbs. There's a difference between white educated women, white uneducated women. And so I think white uneducated women are moving towards Trump. There's some white women who are moving towards Harris. But in the 2016 race,
Mhm.
you had 44% of white women supporting the Democratic Party. And then in 2020, you had 47%, both under 50%.
Right.
So I think it's going to be white women who are going to determine the outcome of this race.
Okay.
I think in some urban centers like Chicago, for example, and in my home city of New York,
Mhm.
you are finding some frustration in particularly in those cities with the thought that resources that the residents need are being diverted to new arrivals that are migrants. And so I'd be interested to see how the vote breaks down in some of these cities where there is some brewing anger about that right now.
That gets us to issue voting.
That's right. That's right. And we'll talk more about that, of course, on WLBT and Fox 40. So make sure to tune in there if you want to hear more from our experts. And of course, for the latest news, weather, and sports and election results tonight, be sure to check us out on our newscast and WLBT.com as those results continue to come in. Of course, those races will be updated for you. I'm CJ LeMaster, lead investigative reporter here at WLBT. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great rest of your night on this election night.